Hello and welcome. My name is Father William Maestri, and this is Overfed and Undernourished. We begin with a simple question. Is guilt a bad thing? By way of response, let me offer you a brief story. There was a man who was a faithful Catholic, went once a month to confession. And as he got into the confessional, and the priest was ready to hear his confession, he said, "Father, before we start, I have a question for you." And the priest says, "Oh, and what might that be?" He said, "Well, Father, I want to know, are you a one-handed priest or a two-handed priest?" The priest was a little taken back by that question, and he says, "Well, why do you ask?" He says, "Well, Father," he said, "I've been coming to confession for years. And I'm so tired of hearing, well, on the one hand, it's a sin, but then on the other hand, it might not be. I'm looking for a one-handed priest who can just tell me yes or no." And that's how we might feel about our question. Is guilt a bad thing? There is simply no simple answer to that question. The great newspaper man of the 20th century, H.L. Mencken, once said, "For every complex question, there's a simple answer, and it's simply wrong." And so often today we want simple answers to complex questions, and we would like them within a minute and a half to 2 minutes. Otherwise, we flip the channel, our mind goes to blank, or we simply get up and leave. Well, is guilt a bad thing? Well, let me revert to my one hand and the other hand. On one hand, guilt is not only a good thing, guilt is a necessary thing for living a truly good human moral life. Could you imagine a world in which no one felt guilt? No one experienced its close relative, shame. For example, you and I have a disagreement, and in the heat of the moment, I get up and leave, and I notice that your car is in the parking lot, and there's no one around. And having my keys handy, I key your car. And now, I don't know of many people who would say that's a good thing. However, if I go and leave and take delight in that, I ought not to be congratulated. I certainly shouldn't congratulate myself. But I feel no remorse, no contrition, no movement to make reparation, none of that. I'm fine. That's not a blessing, that's a deficiency. I'm lacking something. I'm lacking a moral compass. One psychiatrist explained it to me as having a sociopathic behavior. That is, I have an inability to empathize or enter into the feelings or understanding of another person. I'm locked into my own world. It's just what I want, when I want it, how I want it. Remorse, contrition, reparation, confession, none of those things are really on the menu for me. Few of us would really want to live in a world like that. Moral guilt that is really our own, is a sign actually of moral health. Just as we would not want to be in a situation in which we had a disease or an illness and we had no symptoms. Symptoms are a warning signal. You have a fever, you have a cough, you have a runny nose, you kind of feel achy all over. The body is telling you something. It's its warning signal. Get help. This needs attention. Do it now. Well, guilt is the disturbance of our conscience. It's the disturbance that something is wrong and it needs attention. We can't continue to speak that way, live that way, act that way. We have to amend our life. We have to change. And so, moral guilt is a sign of health. The absence of moral guilt is a terrible, crippling dysfunction. of our whole way of living and acting. It is a defect in the very structure of that particular person. So guilt that we own, guilt that we have is rightfully ours. We have done a bad action. We've ruined a person's reputation. We've been unjustly or disproportionately angry with someone or something. That itself is a guilt. It is a wrong response to something that tells us it's wrong. But it's not enough simply to say, well, I felt bad about it. That's fine that you do. That's the warning. Now we need the prescription, not simply the description. And the prescription is to first of all acknowledge, confess that it's wrong, that we in fact are responsible for that particular wrong by our actions or by our words or even by our thoughts. It's wrong. Then we have to acknowledge it, hopefully to the person whom we have offended. We have to make contrition, genuine sorrow from the heart, but also we have to make reparation if that person has been wounded, either in reputation or in property. We have to do what we can reasonably to see that that person is made whole. If I have in fact slandered you or libeled you or hurt your reputation publicly and have told people about it, I have a responsibility to do as much as I can to repair that damage, if in fact I can. That's a rather difficult situation. If I steal something from you, I have to make reparation as best I can, in a discreet way very often, but see that you are made whole from the damage that I have caused. That's what a responsible, mature, moral human being does. And our conscience is that early warning system. It's the alert that something's wrong, because each and every person has written on their heart right and wrong, good and evil. It's planted there by Almighty God. It's part of our moral DNA, if you will. And to let that go away, to not nurture it, to not develop it in a mature and responsible way, is not a good thing. It's to be anemic. It is to be underfed. And to be underfed in the moral life causes a tremendous amount of difficulties in our everyday life, especially within our family, where we work, in our associations. So, is guilt a bad thing? Not when we own it, and we have a right to own it. It's ours. Let me give you my version of a visual, okay? This glass represents your character. Here is a wonderful bottle of Gatorade that I have renamed Guilt-Aid, okay? Guilt-Aid. I hope I don't get into trouble with branding and all of that sort of stuff. But anyway, here's a nice bottle. And here's the guilt that's rightfully yours, right here. This is the guilt. See, I'm going to be kind. I didn't fill it halfway or even up to the top. So that's your guilt. This is something that, in truth, you own. That's yours, right there. That's your guilt. The guilt that is bad, if you will, is the guilt that we don't own, and yet we take upon ourselves. Many people are what I call shoplifters of guilt. That is, we take what we don't own. We let others put upon ourselves, or we feel the need to take on all of the problems and all of the difficulties of others, and we judge ourselves, for example, by how we perform, how we achieve, what the results are, and when they don't turn out, we feel guilty. We feel bad. That's not moral guilt. That's a kind of psychological problem. It's not a moral problem. And so, for example, let's suppose you invite the in-laws over to your house for Sunday dinner, and your wife has worked all day to prepare a wonderful meal. And as the in-laws come over and they sit down, and as they're eating halfway through the meal, everyone is saying how good it is. And somebody says, well, the meat was a little tough, for me. Everyone else liked it. It ruins the entire thing because we don't care that the other 6 people liked it. We obsess on the one person who didn't like it, and we feel bad. What did I do wrong? What could I have done better? Here's our guilt aid. And so, now what do we have? I'll put it in a clean one. There we have the dissatisfied in-law. And they could probably pour more guilt than that in there. And often it's subtle. It's often very, very crafty, the way it's done. We get a telephone call from the school that the principal wants to talk to us about little Johnny or little Clarice. And we go over there, and the principal says, well, your child is cutting up in the class. They're underperforming. What if I must be a bad parent? It must be something that I have done wrong. What can I do better? Where have I failed? Where have I failed? Well, hopefully we won't run out of gator guilt. We take and we pour some more in there. And this can often lead to conflict within the family as one parent accuses the other of not doing enough, not paying attention, and so on and so forth like that. And one that I often hear, a person will come and say, my son or my daughter no longer go to church. I sent them to elementary Catholic school. I sent them to elementary high school. They may even be in a Catholic university, and they don't go to Mass. We go every Sunday to Mass, and now they have fallen away. They don't go anymore. I really must have given bad example, or have I wasted all of this time and money on Catholic school, and I have a child that doesn't go anymore to Mass? I don't even know if they pray. I'm just sick over it. I feel so bad. I feel like I've let them down, I've let the church down, I've let God down, and I'm not a good parent. Now that's a lot of guilt there. I don't know if I have enough gator guilt here to fill this, but I'll try. So this is a serious one. And here's the guilt that is really mine, right there, this little thing right here. But now, and there's 1,000 and more examples of this, if I take all of this shoplifting guilt right here that I've managed to put in my secret bag and take with me, that I don't own, by the way, I don't own this, and I pour it in here, just look at how much more guilt I have. 85% of this is not mine, but I'm carrying it. Or as a friend of mine said, I'm giving it rent in my conscience, in my consciousness, and I'm carrying it around. That is the destructive guilt. That's the irrational guilt. This is a guilt that we don't own, and yet we carry it. It's not God's fault. It's not the Catholic Church's fault. It's not our religion. It's not the Bible. We're doing that. We're doing that to ourselves. We are doing to ourselves what often we would not let other people do to us. We are punishing ourselves, inflicting that guilt on ourselves. And it's not needed. We have to release it and let it go. We have enough. with the little bit of guilt that we have accumulated by our actions. But that guilt can be taken away because sin can be taken away. The psalmist says, "My sin is ever before me. Against you alone have I sinned, O God." And throughout that psalm, the psalmist says, "Clean me with your mercy, and I shall be whiter than snow." It is forgiveness and reconciliation that drains the guilt swamp, that puts guilt back in its proper place and its proper perspective. So this is really the importance and the beauty of the sacrament of penance, the sacrament of confession and the sacrament of reconciliation. People have asked me, well, what do we call it now? Penance, confession, reconciliation? It's very simple. We call it all three. We confess and acknowledge our real moral wrongdoing, where we have fallen short of the glory of God. We express that contrition. We seek forgiveness. We do a suitable penance, yes, whether that be reparations for someone that we have hurt, whether it's praying for the conversion of an enemy, and conversion for our own hearts, by the way, and then seeking reconciliation, to walk once again hand in hand. That's the beauty and the power of the sacrament of confession, penance, and reconciliation. But we do not and cannot, first and foremost, forgive ourselves by ourselves. Such forgiveness comes from the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, who seeks out the lost, who seeks out the prodigal, who seeks out the sheep that goes astray, that seeks out the sinner. In fact, sinners and publicans and all of those of ill repute, they flock to Jesus. Why? Because he loved them. He offered them grace. Because they merited it? Of course not. It's because they needed it. God is there saying to us, leave go of so much of this guilt that you've stolen. You're a shoplifter. Give it up. Let go of that. Take the guilt that is really yours. Here's the guilt aid again. Take this guilt, this much, bring it to the Lord, because in Jesus Christ, in his death and resurrection, Jesus holds this cup. Here's the guilt. That was stolen and taken. Here's ours. He drank this whole cup on the cross for one reason. We can come to this. A nice clean glass, a nice clean soul, a nice clean heart, a nice clean character, so that we can live a better way, a more truthful and peaceful way. So stop shoplifting and open your mind and heart to God. You don't have to lift this, because Jesus Christ has lifted this. This is yours for the taking.